Welcome to the Stuff About Money podcast. I am Eric, your co-host, and I will be joined by Dr. Matt Morris. You know me as the financial planner and Matt as a family therapist, but we're also entrepreneurs and business owners who face the pressure, the burnout, and the uncertainty that comes with chasing big goals. We work with high performers, executives, business owners, and professionals alike who are trying to succeed without losing their health, their relationships, or their sense of direction in the process. That kind of life takes intention, clear boundaries, and a mindset built for growth. In this series, we discuss the habits, the frameworks, the hard-won lessons that we've picked up along the way, and we continue to live out. Through candid conversations and practical tools, we'll tackle the real challenges driven people face when they want to grow without burning out. Let's rethink success together.
As a leader, Eric, you have decisions to make, right?
I do. Lots. And all day.
A lot of decisions. Yeah. And some of those decisions carry more pressure than others. And so today we're talking about that. How do leaders, executives, entrepreneurs make countless decisions throughout the week, throughout the month, and deal with the pressure and fatigue that are part of decision making? We're all worried about making the right choice and avoiding poor choices. So in this episode, we'll explore how to improve decision-making under stress, avoid some of the traps and pitfalls that we can all fall into as decision makers. And hopefully we'll come up with some strategies that lead to more confident, effective decision-making. How does that sound?
Let me correct something that you said. Now, not hopefully, we are going to leave you with some good frameworks for better decision-making for sure, particularly under stress. And then also some ways to help confirm the decisions that you made. You know, on this point, years and years ago, I remember talking to a mentor of mine. It was a business mentor. He had been there, done that type of person. And I don't remember the exact question I asked him, but I'll never forget his response. He goes, "You should only be in the office 3 times a week." I'm like, 3 times a week? Like, I got to work, man. He goes, "Yeah, but a lot of your work isn't at your desk. A lot of your work is decision making, and you need to put yourself in environments that allow you to think clearly to make decisions."
Okay.
And what he was advocating for was for more leisure. That oftentimes leaders, and I know this isn't always the case, but oftentimes we tend to be in a better state of mind to make hard decisions when we're not necessarily thinking about the very thing that we're trying to decide on. But here's the point. If you're a high-performing professional, if you are an entrepreneur, like I'm sure there's some good research on this, but there's probably thousands of decisions that we're making a day, and sometimes we're not really being thoughtful about them. Sometimes they're just their habit, and that's the best place to be. Is most of your decisions are made because you develop good behaviors and good habits, but there are those decisions that are oftentimes gray and they're hard and they impact people positively and negatively, and it falls on our shoulders to make those decisions. So I think that as a leader, as an entrepreneur, this is such an important thing to start building some scaffolding around as you have to deal with these issues throughout your day.
Yeah, first let's just acknowledge what you said, that the decisions fall on your shoulders. There's a weight to decision making. And if you're in a position of leadership, you're going to have to make decisions, some of which are very tough. And so there's a weight with that. And so if we just acknowledge the fact that some weeks are going to be weightier than others, and some decisions are going to be tougher than others, and when those decisions come up, you'll need to do what you can to take care of yourself, and give yourself some grace in having to make those tough decisions, because you will eventually deal with some decision fatigue. Decision fatigue, the exhaustion of making decisions. I once read a in-depth expose about a former president, and the articles stated that this president of the U.S., he discontinued making decisions about what he was going to wear and what he was going to eat. He selected a bunch of suits that were the same, 2 different colors, 3 different ties or something like that, always a white shirt. And then he had the White House chef He told the chef, these are the parameters of the food that I like to eat. And he stopped making the what am I wearing today decision and what am I eating today decision. He turned those over to a process that worked to reduce the fatigue because the article was saying he knew he was going to have to make so many other decisions that day. It's like reps at the gym. You only got so many in you.
Yeah. I've got a friend who I joke with him, and he's been doing this for years. He's got like a packing list saved on his computer. So when he goes, if I'm going on a 3-day trip, here's my packing list.
I do too, by the way.
Here's my here's my 10-day packing list. And then he
Mhm.
also has a list of like these are the shoes that I like to wear. This is my size. He goes, I don't when I need new tennis shoes, I just go, this is the shoe I like. This is the version I like.
Mhm.
Um, Steve Jobs, same thing. I mean, Steve Jobs wore the same thing every
Yeah,
day,
the
like jeans and
uniform.
a solid
Right.
shirt, right? Because there tends to be this whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, but there's like this progressive erosion of like our cognitive resources as we make more and more decisions throughout the day. There's
Yeah.
some wild studies that look at doctors and the amount of screenings, cancer screenings that they order throughout the day decreases dramatically. So they're more apt to. So if you go see a doctor for a cancer screening, go in the morning. Um, there's they prescribe less throughout the day.
Yeah.
So there's something really interesting happening here. There's this one, I forget where it was, but this one study I was reading that judges tend to give parole, um, less parole. There's a less chance of you getting parole if you see a judge at the end of the day than at the beginning of the day. So if you ever find
Yeah.
yourself in court, make sure you go early and not late. But again, there's this again this erosion of our cognitive ability to make decisions as the day progresses, as we tire.
Yeah. Decision is a muscle that wears down over time, and so that's no surprising to me. It's not surprising that it becomes fatigued. Some pitfalls that people get into, some traps that people get into. You've probably heard the phrase analysis paralysis,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Meaning you get stuck
Yeah.
somewhere in the vast amount of data that's coming to you about the decision. On the other side of that, getting stuck, you're impulsive.
Hmm.
Sometimes we see people just go, I don't care, just buy it,
Yeah.
let them go, whatever it is. Just they snap a decision out there. So we don't want to get caught between analysis paralysis on the one side of the spectrum and impulsive decision making on the other side of the spectrum.
But I know for me, I always feel like there's more data out there. There's more information that can
There is
inform
always
the
more data.
decision I'm going to make. And especially in today's world, like I got to go do the research and then I got to go see like normal people on TikTok are saying about it, right? So then you go and, and then it's like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but like, yeah, you get some good informative, like real life stuff on social media, right? When you're trying to learn a topic and you want to see what other people have done. Like there's an element of like, ooh, I can't make this decision until like, what have other people in my situation have done? I don't want to make the wrong decision and I can't make the decision until I have all the data. And there's some of us who lean more that way,
We'll
right?
talk. We're going to talk about how much later. We're going to talk about how
Yeah.
much data do you need to make a decision.
Ooh,
But
give
you
me a
can get
number.
stuck in the idea that you need
Yeah.
more and more and more information. I once read a quote by the CEO of Xerox. You remember the copier company,
Xerox, yeah, Xerox,
Xerox, and
Xerox.
he said, to make an informed decision, I have to read 1.5 million pages of information, and I just can't do that. So there's an acknowledgement that I have a limit. I have a limitation in how much information I can consume, and
Yeah,
I have to live with that limitation. So a
yeah,
second pitfall is when we are consumed by our own biases, emotional biases, or a kind of overconfidence in making the decision, like we know
yeah.
what we're doing. So we have a cognitive bias that
Yeah.
we already have this figured out.
We sometimes think we know more than we do.
Yes.
And along the side of biases, we have these emotional biases as well. Like we sometimes we're so close to the decision that we don't know what we don't know. We're blinded by how we feel about it.
Mhm.
That's a little difficult.
For sure. A third decision making pitfall that people get stuck in is tunnel vision. So they are looking at the decision so acutely and closely that they block off alternatives and other avenues and other ways of doing it and other we only do it this way. They get stuck in a limited set of options too quickly. That's a problem. There's
Mhm. Yeah.
generally lots of ways to skin a cat, right?
Yeah. There's what, 100, 1,000, a million? What's the word? I don't know.
Yeah. I remember one time traveling in a foreign country and being blown away by their crosswalks to cross how people cross the street in different ways than we do in the US. And it's like, huh,
But
I'd never thought
are there multiple
I'd
ways to cross the street?
I'd never thought about like different styles of crosswalks. And I wonder why in the US we get stuck in this one way of doing it and there's other ways to do it. Huh. You know, we all get tunnel vision about how things can be done. And there's a pitfall in there.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
Since we have to make so many decisions, it's important to, as you alluded to earlier, to create time in our day to make decisions.
Hmm.
And executives need decision making time. They need to block off time specifically for decisions.
Is that a practice that you have? I'm curious.
I I will I will not like routinely, but if I have a decision coming up, I will set aside time in my schedule to study something,
Hmm.
to gather information. I might set aside time to call a friend or an advisor, chat about it, and I might put a deadline on my schedule that I need to make this decision by this date,
Hmm.
for instance.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that I'm better at this kind of high level thinking in the morning.
Yeah.
So I would not want to set aside, like if I'm going to have to read a bunch of briefs about something, I wouldn't want to put that at 7 p.m. That's going to put me to sleep.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a 9 a.m. reader,
Have you ever,
a 6 a.m. reader, a 9
yeah,
a.m. reader. I'm in the morning.
yeah. Have you ever had the experience where you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I know what I need to, I know, like you've been giving thought to something, and then you
Have
wake
you?
up and like you just feel like you know the answer. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is the decision I need to make.
Have you had this experience
I have
of like clarity in the morning?
100% clarity. Like not even thinking about the very thing I need to make a decision on. It just
Mhm.
enter my mind almost as if, and you probably know more about the mind than I do, but I mean, we're constantly, I'm one of those people who's constantly thinking. In
Mhm.
fact, I was coming home last night and I told my wife I'm just mentally exhausted. She goes, "Great, you can stop thinking and just cook dinner." And I'm like, "Stop thinking." Ha, right?
Ah.
Like my mind's constantly running, and whether I'm
Mhm.
actively thinking about something or not, it's just like there's like, I'm always mulling something over and running different scenarios and different like what if type of things. And then like sometimes I might not think about it and then it might run through my mind like, "Oh, that makes sense."
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what that is exactly, but some part of the day we can't just see the other angle of the decision, and the next morning we can. The other side of it or another angle or a twist on it is visible to us in the
Yeah.
morning somehow. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it has happened where I
I,
wake up and go, "Oh,
I
oh
do
yeah."
I do find for me when I have a big decision to make or where I'm overwhelmed with the idea of having to make a decision, if I go do something that calms me to try not to think about it,
Mm.
it actually helps me. Like for me, gardening. Like if I go out in my garden, if I disappear in the garden for a few hours a day, not a day, a few hours on the weekend, just like digging in the dirt, planting things, that's like a place where almost like a peaceful place that can calm everything down, right? I don't have my phone with me. There's usually music playing in the background. I don't have a book to read. I don't feel like I have to read this or do this. It's just like very specific thing that needs to get done in the garden, and I can think about the benefits
Yeah.
of doing it long term. It's an interesting. It's like my place that I go.
So let me just like highlight that. So that's getting out of the office, getting into nature,
Hmm.
doing something enjoyable, doing something that is focused and has a way of uncluttering the mind. How would you build that in as a decision making process to your week?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting for me, and I think it's related to decision making when we talk about like the weightiness of decisions. For me, being in nature reminds me of just like the simplicity of life,
Mm.
right? It's not
Hmm.
complicated. I mean, it is if you get into the science of it, but like there's dirt, there's
Yeah.
seeds, there's plants, they grow, they fruit, and its cycle happens and happens. Sun rises, the rain falls,
Yep.
and things happen.
Hmm.
And it forces me to maybe reduce the complicatedness, if that is it's complicatedness, the complexity, that's the word. I don't have my PhD.
I like it. I heard you.
Complicatedness,
I was jiving with you,
the
man. Complicatedness.
complicatedness of life and the decisions. And I think sometimes, and maybe this is part of our biases, where we sometimes overcomplicate. And I think it's when we simplify,
Yeah.
we have more clarity. So, for example, one of my favorite Bruce Lee quotes, the philosopher Bruce Lee. It's a little bit of an odd quote, but it makes total sense. He says, before you know the arts, the martial arts, a punch is a punch and a kick is a kick, right? You just like punch and kick, whatever. He goes, but as you're learning it, a punch is no longer a punch and a kick is no longer a kick, right?
Yeah.
Because you're complicated, you're breaking it down, the
It's
movement, right?
complex now. Right.
And then he says, once you understand the art, a punch is just a punch and a kick is just a kick. So you start almost simply naive,
Yeah.
and then you get complicated, and then you come
Right.
to this like
The bell
simple,
curve of
yeah,
information in a way. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's part of it. Like some decisions just seem really easy. Like after you make it, you're like, God, who everyone could have seen that, right? But there's a process I think that we need to go through sometimes when the decisions are bigger, that are complex, but then we have to get back to a part where we simplify it again.
So just to signpost this part of it, in order to simplify decision making, in order to have the resources to see the decision clearly, we do have to save time. We have to save some energy. We have to get out of the office. We have to often do some leisure activity that grounds us down, grounds us back to reality so that we can see the decision more clearly. And I wonder if leaders are setting enough of that uh, relaxing, restful leisure time aside for decision making.
Yeah, but here's a point of confession. Okay.
Let's hear
Um,
it. Let's hear it, brother
all
Eric.
right, all right. So I like many people, high performers. I always feel like there's more to do, right?
There
And
is.
sometimes there's always more to do, and especially if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, there's more to grow. Um, so sometimes I feel guilty if I'm not working or doing more.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be very intentional about like leisure. And if I don't have anything to do that's meaningful, I'll sometimes just fill my time like, wow, that's a waste. Like I should go do something that's more fun that's gonna probably make me more productive tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
You, on the other hand, are really good at leisure.
Yeah. Yeah, I am.
You're really good at it, right? I sent you a text the other day. We played in a golf tournament together. I sent you a text and said, "Hey, man, let's schedule some golf outings because I need your help to incorporate more leisure in my day."
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, so
so,
you're doing two things there. I mean, you're working on incorporating more leisure, which we're saying right now is going to positively impact decision making.
mhm.
And and if you have trouble setting that up yourself, you're you're relying on a friend or you're invoking a friend
Yeah,
to a support system to help you. So good
yeah.
job.
So let's talk about a
I look
couple
forward to it,
frameworks.
by the
Yeah,
way.
I'm looking forward to it too. By the time people hear this, we'll have already played, so I'll have made many big decisions, I'm sure. No, let's talk about some frameworks to give people some things to work with when they're making decisions. Um, Kind of a tried and true framework that is so simple but yet so effective is Ben Franklin's just kind of like the call it moral algebra, right? I'm trying to make a decision. I'm faced with a decision. What are the pros and the cons of making the decision,
Yes.
right? And you create a list,
Yes.
good versus the bad. Sometimes that's enough to get us over the finish line.
let me add to this. When I'm working with clients, I often notice that they can make the pros and cons list pretty easily. In in the in the from the side of the decision, if I do this, what are the pros and cons?
Hmm.
But I often have them split the paper and fill out the bottom half of the paper from the pros and cons list if I don't do this.
Yeah.
So there's the what if I take this action, pros and cons, but then there's also the what if I don't take this action, pros and cons. And somehow when you flip the decision over on its other side, not doing it, a related but different list of pros and cons reveal. And like you recognize, oh, I don't have to do that. That's often one realization is if I don't do it, it's still okay.
Interesting.
But sometimes what comes up is if I don't do that, there's going to be secondary effects down the road.
Hmm. So that's a very objective way, right? Like let me write down some very objective things. The flip side of that is a little bit more subjective, right? So you're talking about putting yourself, you've made the decision for, or you made not the decision, right?
Mhm.
It's so you present yourself with the decision, making the decision, and gauging how you feel, right? So like if I make this decision, right? Let's say the decision is to, let's say I'm faced with as a business owner, I have to, I've got an employee issue I've got to address, right? The employee is not, they did something that's against our company policies. Okay, it's a
Yeah.
good one. So I'm faced with the decision of disciplining, keeping the employee, or firing the employee, right? So what happens if I keep the employee? How do I feel about that, right? And over a period of time, as we think about the decisions that we can make, do I regularly feel good? Do I feel at peace? Do I feel a sense of maybe not joy, but a sense of like, okay, I'm consoled in my spirit, if that makes sense, right? I'm settled with this decision. It feels right.
Mhm.
If I feel
Mhm.
that more often, then I'm really anxious about making that decision. I'm really afraid. I feel unsettled about it. Then I
Yeah.
think that's insightful. But I think that requires a little bit of slowing down and calming down to be able to be in tune to how do you feel about it. Now, I don't think you can make a decision strictly off of that feeling necessarily, but you can put yourself in these situations where I made the decision to fire and I made the decision to keep. And how do I feel in general about those decisions? And if I oftentimes feel better than worse about the decision, that might be a clue or an insight. And if that aligns with your your pros and cons, well, that's you start to find a little bit of confirmation, and maybe this is a good decision
Yeah.
or a bad decision.
Yeah. I've definitely heard people get to this point where they'll say, like, I just feel at peace doing this.
Yeah,
And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, that is probably then confirmation for you that this is the right way. I've
yeah,
also sat there and thought, I wouldn't trust that feeling. I mean,
yeah,
it feels like you're trying to justify to yourself um, a decision that seems to me not a great decision. So some people are better at this intuitive, emotion centered decision making than others. And you really do have to know yourself if your
yeah,
gut, your instinct, your intuition has been reliable for you, or it or it or you're using it to justify decisions that aren't great.
yeah. So
You really
that
do
goes
have to
back
know
to
yourself.
yeah, that
Yeah.
goes back to the pitfall that we talked about earlier about the emotions of decision making and becoming aware of that. And you said something that reminded me to bring this up. Whenever you read like ancient literature, right? The center, like even in the Greeks, the Romans, like the center of decision making wasn't always the mind. It wasn't the head. It was like the
Right.
gut, right? The heart, right? There was this connection between the mind, the heart, and the gut where decisions. So there was a sense of, I would imagine, a sense of like of subjectivity in some of these
For sure.
decisions that people would make, or
Right.
subjectivity in helping you come to a final decision.
Right. Yeah. And I guess what you're saying there is that the heart and the gut are part of that today.
I would say, yeah.
We
Yeah.
can't we can't always just read more information and talk to more people and pros and cons our way out of this into this decision. Sometimes we have to go with our intuition.
Yeah, because I don't think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. How much information is enough? Is there enough information out there? I have to read 1.2 million pages to make a decision. Is that what it is?
That's
I don't
right.
read. I haven't read 1.2 million pages in my life. Therefore, I'm not qualified to make it right.
Yeah, man.
So speaking on that, I was faced with, I forgot the exact decision it was, but this was probably like 15 years ago. And I had a buddy of mine who was an executive at a big corporation. And I went to him. I said, "Man, you make decisions every day." He goes, "Every day I make decisions." I said, "You make big decisions every day." He's like, "Every day I make big decisions, decisions that dealt with money, dealt with people." I said, "How do you know when when you have enough information to make the decision?"
Hmm.
And he goes, "Here's the problem. Um, you'll never have enough. And we've explained that. And most people get stuck at like 95%. That's just like his number, like 95%. You'll never get the last five. You'll never get the last 10." He
Hmm.
goes, "For me, when I feel like I have like 80% of the decision of the data that I need,
Yeah.
then I'm okay possibly being 20% wrong about the rest. But I can guess what the last 20% means." And really, it was just a way to make faster decisions and not get stuck in that paralysis of analysis. Like, okay, I've got enough. I'm going to guess on the last 20. I could be wrong. There's always a possibility that you make the wrong decisions,
Right.
but a lot of decisions aren't necessarily final. So I don't know 80%. How do you know if you have 80%? Because if you don't know what's outstanding, you don't know. But the point is, you're never going to get it all.
Right. And I think Jeff Bezos is pretty famous for this idea that he makes decisions based on 70% of the available data to him. That
Yeah.
um, that there's an acknowledgement that the information is never going to be incomplete. I mean, that never going to be
Be complete.
complete, always going to be incomplete. And so, as a decision maker, you have to take some of what's available to you, try to consume it, and then make
Yeah.
a decision and try to stand on that decision. And some you can come back from, and some you can't.
Yeah.
Some you can, but there has to be some confidence in just moving forward with the decision with the information that's available to you. I do
Yeah.
want to go back to. I want to also address another maybe more empirical framework for decision making that you've probably heard of, referred to as the OODA loop. And you can Google this, and people can look this up and see the images and the charts that
Mhm.
correspond with the OODA loop. But it's an acronym. It essentially means observe, orient, decide, and act.
Mm.
And I would say the headline of this is that you're trying to gather information and then feed that information forward in the decision making process to inform the next steps.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the scientific method in the way in which you base your next step on the information that you collected in the previous step. So observe. You take a minute before you have to make any decision, and you just look around and see what the issues are, what people are doing, what people are saying. You're collecting information. That's the observation step.
And you could possibly tuck in the pros and cons list into that
Oh yeah,
observation, right?
for
Like
sure, for
that fits
sure.
nicely in that concept.
What do I already know?
Yeah.
What do I already think? That's part of the observation phase. As the next phase is the orient phase, and this just means taking that information and contextualizing it into your values, your culture, your time, what's happening right now in the economy, um, what what developmental stage of life are we in? I'll get just an example. I was talking to somebody recently about a parenting decision, and that decision is totally different if we're talking about a 5-year-old kid or a 25-year-old kid,
Mm,
you
hmm.
know?
Yeah.
So we orient the information in to the person that it applies to, or
In
the
the
phase of
context.
life that we're in. Yeah, the content, we're contextualizing that information. That's orient. And then decide is eventually we have to make a decision.
Yeah.
But that's not the final stage. The final stage is then take action.
Mm.
but in taking action, we're taking action kind of as a test. We're seeing how the how that act works, what's the outcome, and we're continuing to collect data.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of wrapped back around to the observation phase where we're now observing, did what we do help?
Yeah.
And we're continuing to refine the decision using that final step of continuing to observe
Yeah.
how
Because
our action impacted our decision.
if you make enough decisions, you're going to make wrong decisions.
Right.
And you want to know if you've made a wrong decision so you can course correct.
Yes.
So the process of making the decision or acting on the decision isn't final. I like how you kind of I like the idea of this loop that we're almost like in this perpetual state of having to continually decide. That sounds exhausting, but but it's almost like a thermostat to some degree. Like the thermostat's always working, and sometimes we go
Yeah.
off course and we need to course correct, right?
Yeah. Okay. I made a decision. We took action. How is it going?
Yeah.
Not like I hoped.
Yeah. Is it leading to the ultimate goal or objective or direction that I want it to go in? So I want to add another kind of, maybe it's not a step, but we make decisions. And I think sometimes we make decisions and then we act too quickly. I I I kind of like to add another step of of confirming that decision. And you alluded
Hmm.
to calling a friend, calling a mentor. I've done that where we're looking for some confirmation. I've decided this. Okay, I haven't acted yet, but I've done my observing. I've done my orienting. I've sat
Yeah.
there. I feel good about this decision. Now, is there a way that I can confirm it a little better, right? I'm not going out to get more information, okay? I'm
Yeah.
not looking out to see how I feel differently about it. But someone taught me this years ago, and I almost do this by habit now whenever I make a decision. The first thing I do is I assume that the decision is being made by a friend and they're seeking my advice. What would I advise them? What that tends to do, it removes our emotion from it a little bit, right? Now,
Yeah.
this requires you to be able to kind of get out of your own self to some degree and put yourself in someone else's perspective. But usually, the advice that we give is the advice we should take. It is so much easier for us to give advice, right, than to actually do it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's the same advice I would give you that aligns with the decision I made, that's a maybe a little bit of confirmation that okay, this seems right. The second thing I'll do, and this is a little bit harder, is project yourself 20, 30 years out and look back on this decision. So you're kind of removing yourself from the time and the place of the decision.
Hmm.
Would you have still made the same decision? What this tends to do is it removes some of the urgency behind that we feel with some of the decisions that we make.
Right.
And sometimes like, oh, maybe I'm making this to be bigger than it really is. And it could also maybe alleviate some of the anxiety of having to make that decision. Like, hey, it's really not that, because like if I make the wrong decision, I've got 20 years, I can course correct. It's not as
Yeah.
weighty. I was talking to um, we're in the college selection uh, part with my middle kid, and I was talking to someone else about their kid's decision, and I'm like, at the end of the day, if they make the wrong decision, it's not the end of the world. Like it's not like they wreck their life. Like we can course correct, but you
Yeah.
have to kind of back yourself out to zoom in to look at it and say, okay, what 6 months of my life I spent at the wrong college or studying the wrong thing?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's so important. And removing yourself from the immediacy of it, fast forwarding yourself in time, for instance,
yeah, the garden's a
really,
great place to do that.
it really does help bring some clarity to the decision. And sometimes you'll arrive at this is a really important decision.
Yeah, yeah.
It is really important.
Which leads me to the last thing of confirmation is I'm putting myself in a position where now I have to justify myself to someone that I hold in really high esteem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, depending on your faith background, right? You can plug in how you do that, but like you have to justify this decision to
Yeah.
someone you don't want to let down.
Yeah.
Would you still make that same decision? And I think if you kind of go through the steps of those three pieces of confirmation, oftentimes you're making the best decision that you're able to make with the data that you have.
That's good. That's good. Do you think of this as being part of indecision or part of responsible decision making?
Which part?
Just going through these steps, going through putting, the rigmarole of trying to make informed decisions,
Yeah. Okay.
thinking about explaining it to a friend, thinking about, or taking the time to talk it through with some advisors, thinking about looking back on it 20 years from now. Do you think that's part of indecision or part of healthy decision making or
Yeah. So I think it depends on the weightiness of what you're deciding on, right? If you're deciding on where you're going to go to lunch today, then like
uh-huh.
that's a pretty immaterial decision.
Dude, that is such a hard decision for me in New Orleans. Where am I going to go to lunch today? That I just make a list of like 10 restaurants that I enjoy and I just pick from those 10 because there's too many.
Yeah, there's like two restaurants that I go to lunch like all the time. Like cuz I don't want to
Yeah.
have to make a decision. Like I know what I like there. I'm just going to go. I don't want to I actually cringe when someone's like, "Where should I go to dinner?" Like someone texted me like, "Hey,
Yeah.
someone's asking me where should I go to dinner?" I'm like, "What do you want to eat?"
Yeah.
And
That
there's
is
this like
too
immediate
big, too
rush of
broad of a,
anxiety. Like there's like
yeah,
150,000 places or 1,000 plus in New Orleans that are good.
are real good.
What do you
Right. That's like a blank canvas to me. It's just
wears
like
me
too
out.
much. Yep.
So I do think the depending on the decision, yeah, it's indecision. Make a go figure out where you're gonna go to lunch, go eat lunch. And if you make a decision, you got
Pick
364 more days this year to correct it,
pick
right?
something. Yeah.
I do think there's a danger here for people who tend to be perfectionists.
Yes.
Indecision is a symptom, or maybe not a symptom, but is definitely a yeah, it's a symptom of of perfectionism because you don't want to
Yes.
make the wrong decision, so you just would rather not make a decision.
Right.
But I do think there's a sweet spot of thoughtful, critical thinking when you're making big decisions that impact people. And I think that's key. When you're making decisions that impact people,
Yeah.
I think you do want to be more thoughtful and more. I think it's better to be a little bit slower to make a good decision than to be hasty and make a bad decision.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
you can
That's
make it
good.
too quick and you can make it too long.
That's good. Every decision maker has to develop processes for making decisions over time. That's kind of what we're talking about today is just various ways in which we can get stuck, various ways in which we can get overwhelmed or fatigued, and then strategies for making decisions. The decision making process though is not about perfection because we know that perfection often is the enemy of productivity.
Hmm.
And so the goal is not make the perfect decision. It is making well informed, thoughtful decisions that align with your values and your goals.
Yeah.
If you will create a system for that, you're much more likely to consistently make good decisions.
I don't think that often. So oftentimes when I work with my clients, sometimes it's hard to put a number on the impact of the advice that I give. Right? I tell people oftentimes that the role that I play is helping you make faster, wiser decisions, which uh, can have huge impacts moving forward.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes having that structure, that framework built in to help you make faster decisions is, man, it's
It's
invaluable.
gold.
Gold.
Yeah,
Gold.
it's gold. It's gold. It's that you're not consumed in spending so much time agonizing over decisions. You have some framework in place that allows you to make informed, value-driven decisions
Yep.
that you can make in a little bit more expedient way.
And that's the power in the context of working directly with a coach or with a mentor. Is this
Yeah.
this right here is Effective decision making is so important.
We at some point we need to come back and talk more a little bit about how perfection is the enemy of so many things, but also
Mm.
decision making. So we'll have to come back to that. But um, we'll leave it here. We'll put some discussion questions, some reflection questions, some thought questions in the show notes. We'll pick it
Yep.
up there.
Awesome. Y'all, we appreciate y'all for listening. If you know someone who this benefits, please share it. Y'all take care.